Hello everyone, welcome again to my room. I hope you're having a happy new year as I'm recording this on New Year's Day. A lot of people were looking towards the end of 2020. To me, it's still 2018, so time is just flying super fast. I'm in my 20s and it just feels like every year time just exponentially increases in speed. Anyway, it's been a little over a year since I started my Credenza build, and I wanted to go ahead and make another video talking about it a little bit more because I never really did any details, and the one video I put out was really just a highlight reel of the whole project. So I thought, well, I'll just go ahead and make a commentary video on the original Credenza video that I put out back in May for all of us to watch together, and I can just add my comments about the project as we go. So a little bit of background, I originally started CADing this, so I was designing it on my computer back in November 2019. Then I started putting it together late December, then I got sick and was out for about a week, and that only gave me about 3 days or so before Christmas. That was the original intent, was to make this a Christmas present. Ended up not getting it done. And then I started a new job in the new year, and I started working on it a little bit at night, and ultimately really didn't get it done until March, and then I didn't have the video out until May. So the reason I share that with you is that projects like this just don't happen overnight. You just don't take a week off from work and get all of this done. You have to break it up into sections, break it up into chunks. And the project comes out a lot better when you can focus on one part at a time instead of trying to do a whole bunch at one sitting. Hopefully, if you don't think you're capable of doing a project like this, that gives you an idea of what it takes and gives you a little bit more relief that maybe you could do this kind of project yourself. But anyway, let's go ahead and dive right into it. I'll be watching the video on mute, and I'll be pausing it anytime I have a very long thing to say. Hopefully, I can keep longer comments to a minimum. Hi, my name's Breece. In this video, I'm making this modern TV Credenza. So as you'll notice, I'm wearing the same shirt in the photo shoot that I did as I am wearing right now. Just a little tidbit. All right, we'll pause it right here. So I did the photo shoot immediately after I had it done, and what I did when I finished it was that I put tung oil and then I put polyurethane over it, and you'll see at the end I did the whole credenza on its sides, that way I could do the whole thing at once. And the problem with that was that the top and one of the sides was in a shadow, so I couldn't really see the whole thing about whether I was getting the tung oil on evenly, and of course I didn't, and I had to actually sand the top down and that one side and redo it, which is kind of a bummer. Getting that transition took a long time to get that right. Fun little tidbit here, all this plywood came out of the trash. I know a cabinet maker nearby, and I will constantly ride my bike down there to see if there's anything good in the dumpster. And I've been stockpiling this for a while. So went ahead and put in all the pocket holes I needed before I glue things together. Now those side panels didn't need to be two pieces glued together. You could have done just rails. That could have made the credenza a lot lighter, but because of the trim, I was trying to get the whole thing to be a certain thickness. So it was something I really didn't think that much about, but I needed the L shape to create the cubby in the cabinet. Now you'll see here, I was extremely impressed. All I did was wood glue and these 3-inch drywall screws, and you'll see me try to push these around in the video. Those sides are they're so stiff. I couldn't believe it. You can barely shove them around. And in fact, they weren't even squared. So when I tried to square them up, they wouldn't budge. I was amazed. So this is the back of the cubby I'm working on right now. It's the first piece of the walnut plywood that I cut up. And I originally was gonna do a semicircle cutout for cords. Decided that the square would be a lot easier, and I thought that looked a lot better. So I'm kind of surprised I didn't think of that originally. What I forgot to do though was include the thickness of the bottom. So technically this is supposed to be half an inch taller. Not a big deal. So I got this trim locally from a guy that recycles hardwood trees, or he cuts them down, saves them from being burned. And he had just a bunch of huge stock of like 4/4 stuff. And I didn't need something that was 2 foot wide. I just needed this stuff. And I dug through the pile for like an hour. At the very bottom I found these pieces, which was perfect. Except for one thing I'll talk about later. They were like 2 or 3 inches short, but I did find a way around that, so. Now, in my opinion, I spent way too much time in this video focusing on how I made the feet. I think that's one of the most unexciting segments of this project, and I'm surprised there's not a huge dip on the analytics on this part of the video, but I think I spent way too much time working on showing the feet in the video. I was just really excited to use up all these scraps. I really like using up scraps because I hoard scraps. Now, it turns out when I screwed everything together that the credenza wasn't perfectly flat on the bottom, so I ended up not using the foot that was in the front middle because it created sort of a teeter-totter, and the thing's already stiff enough as it is. Now, you'll see me working on the sides here, cut the miters, and I added the spacing I needed to get out so I had enough thickness for the trim. And I was constantly in this struggle of like, what do I screw on first? The sides of the top, the sides of the top, because I want to be able to adjust everything to get that miter just right, which was extremely frustrating to do. But ultimately ended up doing the sides first, then the top. Obviously that's not how it is in the video, but that's how I did it. And then you'll see me work on the top here, and really all I had to do was create spacing, so I had that thickness really for the trim, but this also added some stiffness for the top. That's like 1.5 inches in between. You can see I have a $300 cabinet blade, so the reason I did that whole concrete block on the table saw was because I don't have a $300 circular saw blade. I just have a $300 table saw blade, so every cut I did was on the table saw, and I also wanted to get that perfect square for the miters. That had to be perfect. And the width, trying to get the width the whole top was like freaking impossible. It felt that way anyway. I was just so lucky the way things worked out. And actually, you'll see it when we get further in the video. You'll notice it because I mentioned it. But if you look at the corners of the miter, there's nothing in the corners. It's just dead space. And honestly, if I were to redo this again, I would do like solid walnut in the corner, because when you try to round over a plywood mitered corner, you just get plywood. And you don't really want that, so I just rounded it over just a little bit and then put some marker over the plywood that showed. But what was nice about having that dead space is that I could kind of squish the top end a little bit to press it up against the sides, and it had that little bit of flex because it had that dead space both on the top and the sides. So you notice for the top that I used the spacers, right? But I screwed those in from behind. And it looks kind of weird screwing in something that's like 1.5 inches into something that's 1/2 inch. And I only had like 1 or 2 screws that I didn't catch that went all the way through, and I found them when I was sanding, and they created this little shiny metal spot on the top. But the finish kind of dulled that a little bit. There's a little bit of a black spot where the screw is around on the top, but it's not that big of a deal. It kind of blends in. It's really only something that I notice. The other thing I'll note about the top was that I put the inside of the cubby on top of the back and side pieces, so I had 1/2 inch along the back and the sides where I could add screws to screw it in, but the front obviously was exposed, so that just had to be glued. So you can see how thick those sides are. It's like 3 inches thick. Kind of made this thing kind of heavy, but yeah, that's the way it goes. Okay, these pieces are the reason why this credenza can't be taken apart. The fact that I glued those in because I had no other way to attach those. Those hide all the last bit of the screws, so because of those side pieces, you can't take the credenza apart. And I actually had to fit those in there. Those actually weren't perfectly square. I had to cut them on the bandsaw a little bit. All right, here you can see me put on the edge banding. You know, there's no reason to make the inside where the drawers are going to be walnut. All I really need to do is cover up what's exposed from the drawers, which is really just the sides. So all I had to do is put the edge banding on, and I took a blade out of a plane because it's nice and flat to trim those. This is just one of those random pieces that you just, because it's exposed, you just gotta plan for it and make a little piece that fits there. Had a couple of those like that. Alright, so going back to the trim, because the piece is actually 3 inches too short to get all 4 pieces out of, because you have to remember, this is like a 3.5 by 3.5 block, and I need trim that is 3 inches by 3 inches, but also has a 45-degree miter cut out of it. So there's 2 pieces right there, and then one piece is like 3.5 feet, and the other piece is like it wasn't that long, but it was like 3-some feet, and the other piece is like 7.5 feet, something like that. So the pieces weren't long enough to do miters end on end, so kind of like this. So you have miter here, and then this is all dead space. So what I had to do actually was overlap the miters like that so I have enough. But because it was a compound miter joint, this is really difficult to explain. It's kind of difficult to imagine. I accidentally cut out a chunk of one of the corners, And I had to do that for 2 of the pieces. Now, one piece just got covered up because I cut it too narrow. And I had to add a veneer to make it thicker, so that's covered up. But there's one part on the credenza where you can kind of see that, where I had to glue a block in place to cover that little chunk that I cut out. And he actually gave me, the guy I bought this from, just gave me like a 2-foot piece, and that's what I used to make the veneer and the blocks out of. And I'm lucky I had that, because otherwise I was screwed. I don't have any other walnut, so that all worked out. Oh my gosh! So I bought a bandsaw later in the year, but at this time I didn't have it. So I just had to use the table saw, and it created so much smoke. I had to like leave the shop for like 24 hours and let it settle, because even just the windows open, it was, well, first off, I didn't want to open the windows because it's like 20 degrees outside. I'm trying to keep the shop warm. I just had to leave it and let everything just kind of settle down. And then I also made a little jig to plane the faces down on the planer. That really worked out. I just screwed on the trim. That worked out really, really well. Although I did put some corkboard in between the trim and the plywood, just with shrinkage and expansion, so you don't get that weird crack that kind of happens. Painted the edges black, both of the corkboard and the plywood, just so it would be less visible and less obvious that the whole thing's basically plywood. And then this, I had to glue a strip of walnut on the bottom because that's where the drawers are, but I also had to glue up some plywood just to have a place to screw the trim to on the bottom. There you can see me paint the edges there black. This also, like, I didn't need to be as exact with the thicknesses of the trim too, which is kind of nice because it was pretty inconsistent. And if you look in the shadows, like in the right lighting, you can kind of see how the trim is inconsistent with the top in terms of how flat it is. All right, here's a part I'm surprised doesn't have a dip in the analytics. This is just me cutting up the plugs for the screws, and I think it just makes the video too long. So once you get the screws in, you know, that's pretty much all it is. You just gotta put in all the plugs and fill them all in with some filler, make sure everything's nice and square, and you hardly even see them on the finished product. All the walnut just blends in so well, especially if you get the plugs to line up with the grain on the trim. Now, the other thing I don't talk about or show enough in this video is all the supports that I added. So you see there that I added some supports underneath the cubby, just because it's 1/2-inch plywood. You have like a 2-foot span, and I was kind of worried about things dipping, and I didn't want things to dip. But really, with a 6-inch cubby, what are you going to put there that's heavy enough to cause it to dip? It's not like it's not supported at all. And it does decrease the height of the drawers by, like, I think it was 1.5 inches is what I made those. But you know, they're removable, and they do keep everything nice and square and straight, and they add some support just to the structure, not to the shelves. So now you see me working on the drawers. This is the first time I ever cut box joints in my entire life. They came out horribly. Had a lot of tear outs. I put some blue tape, but there was just too much space in between the box joints, and I had used a little jig I saw a guy make on YouTube to make these, and it would definitely be nice to have something a little bit more advanced to make box joints in the future. So you can see me finish the drawers. They came out great. Once again, using the table saw to cut the drawer fronts. And here's the thing about the drawers. So all this is 1/2-inch plywood, and the thing is that when I designed this, I did not want to go over 2 sheets of plywood, because this stuff, the place I'm getting it from, is $150 a sheet. So I was not going to do more than I had to for this project. So when I was designing it, I was designing all the pieces with that constraint about how I don't want to go over 2 pieces of plywood, and I also only wanted to keep it to 1/2 inch. I could have gotten 1/4 inch, could have gotten 3/4. Decided 1/2 inch was the best. And ultimately I wanted 3/4 inch thickness for the drawers. And so what I did was I took every single scrap of 1/4 inch that I had, and I mean scraps, not like sheets, scraps, and I glued them all to the back of the drawer front, and I put them on in a way that you can't really see the pattern. I mean, it's a drawer front, so you only have like 1 inch or so exposed anyway, and then I put the edge banding on to cover up the seams on the sides. So that's how I got my 3/4 inch thickness. So getting the drawer fronts on was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be, actually. Just the credit cards helped a lot with doing that. Came out great. Drawer guides are a must. And then the reason there's no hardware is just because there's that little lip on the back of the drawer fronts that lets me pull the drawers in and out. So the back, I screwed up the measurement for the little hole for the cords and stuff in the back. That was kind of frustrating, but oh well. I have a bunch of 5/8 and snails I want to use up, so that's why I'm not using my brad nailer. And then I decided after the fact to add this little shelf in, mainly just to cover up the drawer so like dust doesn't get in there, but it also adds like a little shelf you can put like a power strip or something like that in there if you wanted to. And then because I finished this in March after the coronavirus had started, I decided to go ahead and put that on the back and the date I started. So put the date I started, I put the date that I finished on the back of the credenza. Here's me finishing it. Like I said, I did it on its side so I could do it all at once. The tongue oil, I originally did a poll on my maker page to see what I should do. And I originally had black walnut tongue oil, but then someone said that's way too dark. Just do regular tongue oil. So that's what I did, tongue oil and water-based polyurethane. And it originally was really, really red, then it went really, really dark, and then like kind of found this happy medium over about a week or so of drying after I finished it. So these pictures actually make it look really good. It looks that good in real life, but these pictures really do make it look really, really good. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you guys liked the video, and hope you have a good year. Thanks, take care.